in a moment. James Alexander Winnefeld Jr., ladies and gentlemen.
Guten Tag. And thank you so much for letting me give my presentation in English. And thank you, Connie, for that very kind introduction. I've never been introduced as almost Tom Cruise, so I have to remember that one. But I really am so delighted to be back in Berlin with you today to have the opportunity to speak in this very remarkable setting about a frequently overlooked dimension of zero outage that I believe demands our attention. And I would begin by posing a question. Are there types of human activity in which a single unforced error could result in a major loss of credibility for an enterprise, or a steep decline in revenue, or even some unwelcome new regulations, or perhaps even the demise of the organization itself? Think about manned and unmanned spaceflight. Think about transportation, roads and airlines, air traffic control, oil tankers passing through hazardous straits. Think about the financial markets. As Connie mentioned earlier, think about hospitals and medical care. Think about the power grid itself. And think about your highly competitive telecommunications and information technology industry and the very purpose of this conference, which of course is zero outage. Nothing else matters. Now, most of you are fully aware of the estimates of the cost of cyber attacks that are quite high, up to as much as $1 trillion per year removed from the global economy through cybercrime alone. Some have estimated 150,000 jobs in Europe have been lost. Hundreds of companies in every business sector have experienced serious and potentially existential damage due to cyber attacks. Think about what happened to Target, Saudi Aramco, Sony Pictures Entertainment, and many others that have experienced serious attacks. Last week's news is that MySpace lost over 117 million LinkedIn emails and passwords. I had no idea that they had that many. You are exposed to this risk, and you are not alone. The U.S. Department of Defense fends off many millions of attacks each year, and yes, some still get through. Everyone in this business, your business, is vulnerable, from suppliers to customers and everywhere in between. The cyber threat vectors come from a host of actors, all the way from nations, look what we've seen in the last few years, and their proxies, all the way down to the criminal activity that hinders us all. These actors capitalize on a wide variety of vulnerabilities, from hardware, supply chains, to software, and to good old operator error. And the negative effects are wide-ranging, from exposure of very sensitive information about people and companies, to massive theft of intellectual property, to outright destruction of computers, as we saw with Saudi Aramco, not to mention the additional cost of protection and insurance. So it would make sense that a smart executive would do everything possible within reason to prevent such a mess from happening in the first place. And the higher the stakes for an individual enterprise, whether the result of an attack or just simple human error, the greater the need to prevent a deviation from becoming a disaster. Now, within the upper regions of that need for prevention lies something very special known as the High Reliability Organization, or HRO. HROs are those rare enterprises that somehow have managed to achieve near error-free, zero outage operations. You should consider joining this club, and I'm delighted to see that Deutsche Telekom and T-Mobile are doing just the same. If you're highly vulnerable to unforced errors in cyberspace, that's where you need to be. Now, in the process of doing that, it would make sense, it would be natural to want to learn from other disciplines that have already made the journey to being an HRO. And that's why we're here today, because there's no better example from which to learn than the gold standard of HROs, at least in the United States military, what we know of as the U.S. Navy's nuclear propulsion program, where there really is no room for a deviation turning into a disaster. This organization came into existence in the 1950s under the firm guidance of an almost fanatically dedicated engineer named Admiral Hyman G. Rickover. His program has operated nuclear propulsion plants aboard hundreds of submarines and ships for over 60 years, steaming over 250 million kilometers without a single reactor accident or harmful release of radioactivity from a nuclear reactor. Not every Navy can claim a similar record of safety and quality. The program is so well recognized for its quality that when NASA tragically lost its second space shuttle, Columbia, it called on this program to help it sort through what might have contributed to the problem. Stark contrasts were found between the two programs. So how can this program be so effective and so safe? I stumbled into this program in 1995 at the ripe old age of 39 years old, almost halfway through my 37-year of service in the Navy. I left the fun of being a Navy fighter pilot, where I enjoyed what I call the ultimate in motor sports, landing jets on aircraft carriers, to enter the fascinating world of learning to actually drive them and to manage them and to lead them. Ultimately becoming, as Connie said, the captain of USS Enterprise, entrusted with the 8 nuclear reactors powering that ship, where under United States law, I had to be fully trained in how to operate them. Believe me, it was a real culture shock. Now, like most of you, I've always been deeply curious about what makes some organizations perform well and others not so well. And it quickly became clear to me after I entered this program that there was something very special going on here. And what works for them can work in other fields that have high exposure to technical risk, including cyber. Now, nuclear propulsion plants and cyber networks are each very big systems of systems. They both use fascinating, complex, but largely hidden blend of science and engineering to produce something very special for their consumers. And they do so in a way that almost seems magical. The magic in a nuclear propulsion plant is everywhere. It's all over the place. But notable is how the physics of a nuclear propulsion plant's design allows it to normally just regulate itself, with the operator only having to open and close the throttles, and the power in the plant is controlled automatically. The magic in cyberspace, of course, is how a semiconductor can switch on and off an electrical current. Something very simple, but it allows cascades of switches to perform logic functions that allow self-organizing packets of information to be sent nearly instantaneously across vast distances and reassemble in exactly the right place, beautifully opening up a whole new world of information and commerce and transforming nearly everything we do, at least in my lifetime. But of course, as you understand, along with all this beauty and magic come inevitable vulnerabilities that are found in complex man-made systems. Admiral Rickover knew full well, due to the mystique associated with all things nuclear, that a nuclear accident or a failure fatally trapping a submarine under the ice could cause the very quick end of a very good program that promised to completely transform naval warfare and submarine warfare. He knew he needed high reliability, literally zero outages in that program. And so he set about making it happen. Of course, he brought the highest possible technical capability to bear on the program. His reactors use only the highest quality materials. They have redundant systems and multiple safeguards that will automatically shut down the reactor in the event of a problem. He penetrated deeply into his supply chain and brought the same philosophies into the supply chain that he had in his own program. And he introduced rigorous testing and the highest quality maintenance procedures into everything that the program does. But he also realized that technical safeguards simply were not enough, and that there were still ways that human beings could endanger his precious propulsion plants. This applies in cyberspace as well, where I believe we have grown an unfortunate tendency to rely on technology alone to save us from ourselves, treating human beings as the lowest common denominator. Now, the U.S. Department of Defense has very good cyber technology, and it's getting better as we consolidate 15,000 networks down to only a few, and increasingly adopt cloud computing and advanced malware protection. The department has found that as they improve, among the many, many millions of attacks they experience every year, very few actually get through and are effective. But when they do, they can be devastating, and they are almost always, if not always, enabled by some form of human error. 90% of malware that we see requires human interaction before it can infect a computer. In fact, with all of our emphasis on technical performance, such as better firewalls and the like, the fact is that we are actually forcing our adversaries, and even our own experts, who you have heard of, to attack human error, because that's what we call a target-rich environment. And because attackers are so persistent, it may only take one single mistake to let somebody into your network and wreak havoc. One foreign nation caused the shutdown of an important Defense Department network for several weeks because only 2 out of 1,500 people on that network had clicked on a particular spear-phishing email. And our entire network, many years ago, operating in Afghanistan, was compromised because people were using corrupt thumb drives to move information from one network over an air gap to an isolated network and vice versa, allowing malicious software and all kinds of information to make the jump over that air gap. Cybersecurity really is a journey, not a destination. It's a constant battle, and the full spectrum of our people, from our most highly skilled and qualified and trained administrators to the most routine user, has to be part of that fight. So how did Admiral Rickover fight his battle against human error? Well, he started by taking ownership. He realized that ultimate responsibility for the safety and security of his program was on his shoulders. And he built that expectation into every single leader in his organization. The same is true of performance and human performance in cybersecurity, which requires ownership on the part of senior leaders like you, including CEOs and their boards and every leader down the chain. There's an old saying that says, culture is the collective behavior of the senior leadership. There's another old saying that says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And in this case, it starts right at the top. And it doesn't just mean words, it means actions. Senior leaders cannot be cavalier even about their own cybersecurity. And your organization simply will not respond if your senior leaders are not fully and personally invested in high reliability in cyber. Now, Rickover built on this in the Navy program by personally interviewing every single officer who entered his program. And that's a practice that lives on today. Even though I was halfway through my career, I had to be interviewed by the head of that program before I was allowed in. You should choose very carefully the people who have the most to do with ensuring the quality and reliability of your information technology. Rickover then trained his people, forcing them to learn more than most operators probably thought they needed to know. More on that in just a moment. Rickover also believed in the power of checking on how things are really working, getting out there and having a look. So he instituted a system of scheduled and spot inspections, always done by a third party. The scheduled inspections are tough and thorough. They look under every single rock, and you do not want to fail that inspection. These inspections give the program valuable feedback on both best practices and worst practices so they can do things better. The surprise inspections mean an outside observer can come aboard your ship any time of day or night while your ship is in port and do a complete walkthrough of your propulsion plant. And the next morning, a lucky captain has to explain to a regional technical authority everything that was found to be out of order. And I can assure you that with 8 nuclear reactors under my command, I got to do that plenty of times. This applies to you. If you don't have a really good independent audit and inspection program, for your network security apparatus, you have no idea what it's really doing, and you will not get what you expect out of it. Rickover also instituted a culture of accountability and required self-reporting, including a quarterly personal letter from every ship's captain to him, along with special incident reports to document any deviations that occurred over the previous quarter, or episodically as well. He believed that unless you can point to the person who is responsible and accountable, then no one is responsible or accountable. And he laid special accountability right on the top of a ship's captain's shoulders. You can institute a similar program of accountability in your cybersecurity culture. Above all, and what I want to stress the most today, is that Admiral Rickover instituted a set of enduring operational excellence principles into his program that govern every aspect of how our sailors operate our nuclear power plants. These principles are not just words. Every operator lives and breathes them, which you will see are all interrelated, and all of which are applicable to how we do business in cyberspace. Let me go through them for you individually. The first and most important principle is integrity. This is the fundamental bedrock assumption that we have to be able to make about our people, and thus it's vital to all of the other principles. It's what you do when nobody is there watching. It's about resisting the temptation to take a shortcut or to lie about a mistake. This culture of integrity is drilled into our nuclear operators from the day they enter the program. It's deeply internalized and it becomes part of who they are. It changed my life. It's very rare for an operator to take a shortcut or cheat, and they are spring-loaded to bring any mistakes immediately to the attention of their supervisor, which saves us an awful lot of time in diagnosing problems and helps the team take corrective action much faster. If necessary, the honest, mistake-making operator is taken out of the game for a while, given some training, and put right back in. But as long as the mistake was an honest one, they are normally not punished. Rather, our operators are trained to fear the consequences of dishonesty rather than to fear the consequences of honesty. And if caught in a single integrity mistake, they're usually sacked. There are very rarely any second chances in the Navy nuclear propulsion world. So how does that apply to cybersecurity? Well, we want our cyber operators, when they're faced with the choice between doing the difficult right thing or the easy wrong thing, to make the right choice. Cyber operators who understand that integrity is actually vital to the protection of their network will be less tempted to violate the rules and procedures that you publish. They're also more likely to tell us when they have inadvertently made a mistake by clicking on a bad link or something like that, allowing us to act far more quickly to protect our network from an attack. And there should be consequences for a breach of this principle. Maybe not as severe as I've just described, but they need to be there. Our second principle is level of knowledge. Rickover knew that when the captain of a submarine is under the ice and something goes wrong, he will literally not be able to ask the experts at home for help. This is far more than just training people to the procedures for how they operate their propulsion plant. It's not just about the what, it's about the why and the how. And that means knowing much more about the plant than people think they might need to know. It's difficult training. Nuclear propulsion officers spend a full year gaining the equivalent of a master's degree in nuclear engineering and nuclear power plant operations. And the training is continuous after that. As Reinhard alluded, continual updating your license and a double check frequently to see how you're doing, to include a very difficult examination that is taken about 3 or 4 years after they've actually entered the fleet. You will find that testing is absolutely essential, and you'll also find that smarter people will operate with far fewer mistakes. And when an operator truly understands what's going on inside the system and how it works, and really understands the stakes for what happens when there's a failure, then he or she is much more likely to do the right thing. How does this apply to cybersecurity? Well, you can rely on telling people not to fall for a spear phishing attachment in an email. But unless they really know what that means and really know all the bad things that can happen if they do it, they'll be less likely to obey that rule, especially when something either well disguised or really juicy pops up in front of them. This requires not only initial but periodic training. It's more than just the do's and don'ts, and it's also constant reminders and refreshers. Simply having people do an online course is not the most effective way, in my view, to produce the right level of knowledge. It needs to be done in person. Now, our third principle is procedural compliance. Procedures in most organizations are written in blood and are an obvious line of defense. A nuclear propulsion plant operator will always follow the established procedure, usually with the book open right in front of her. She's enabled in this activity by her excellent level of knowledge of why the procedures are the way they are, as well as by her deep devotion to integrity and doing the right thing. How does this apply to cybersecurity? It's pretty obvious. At the administrator level, it means maintaining your network by the book and keeping up with it in time. Now, I work with a cybersecurity firm that scans organizations' networks from the outside. They actually index every internet-facing device in the world every 2 hours, perfectly legally, perfectly ethically, and you would be amazed at the most basic administrator errors that they are able to find almost anywhere they look. These truly are unforced errors. At the user level, workers across the enterprise have to comply with some pretty simple procedures. Basic things that they should know by heart and also know why they know them by heart. And remember what I said about inspections. How often do you really check on your organization to see whether it's following the procedures you have specified? You can find scheduled and unscheduled spotways to audit whether your system administrators and users alike are complying with what you've told them to do. Now, I've combined the next two principles, which are formal communications and forceful backup, in the interest of time. Whenever we do something that places our propulsion plant at risk, we put it in a different condition. We have backup on hand. Anyone can stop the machine, and they are not in trouble if they stop the machine for an invalid reason, if they thought they were right but they were wrong. We also create a very special atmosphere of formality in which nothing interferes with getting the job done right, whether it's on the bridge of a ship or in the nuclear propulsion plant. Procedures and orders are clearly stated and repeated back verbatim, just to make sure that they were properly understood. And small talk is not allowed as a matter of routine, especially when an important procedure is being performed. We also have backup from automatic systems, including those that can automatically shut down, or what we call scram, the reactor if it's approaching a dangerous condition. How does all this apply to cybersecurity? Well, at the administrator level, it means that, for example, whenever a key network setting is being changed, there really should be 2 people present. And this should be done within an atmosphere in which the steps of the process are formally stated and repeated back. Having 2 people present can also lower your vulnerability to an insider threat, as we in the U.S. government found, to our chagrin, with someone named Edward Snowden. And just like a reactor, backup at the user level can mean an automated system that's able to quickly detect or even prevent unauthorized activity, such as detecting when somebody inserts a thumb drive into a computer. And there are many things that you can do automatically with attachments and whether people can click on them or not. Now, your business may actually be less efficient if you make it harder for people to use that kind of hardware or to click on links. It's up to you. But whatever you do decide on how you set the standard inside your organization should be done deliberately rather than being based on hope that nothing bad will ever happen. Now, our final principle is having a questioning attitude. And this is one of the hardest things to bring into young people's minds. Imagine a young sailor taking hourly readings in a propulsion plant, writing them down on a clipboard, and seeing a temperature on a gauge rising. He should be asking, based on his level of knowledge, whether it's normal under current operating conditions for this temperature to rise, or is it something wrong that can be intercepted before it causes grave damage to a bearing or something else in the propulsion plant. These operators are trained to not simply record the data, but to question it, to monitor trends, to ask why something might look different. And of course, this is enabled by their high level of knowledge. And when they find something wrong, they tend to not stop at the first problem they find. They pull the string all the way through the system to see what else could be going wrong, because it's very often two things. Now, this is terribly important in cybersecurity. When a network is behaving in a strange way, our operators have to be trained to not ignore it, or wish it away, or hope for the best, or just think it's a normal anomaly. People need to report what they see. As we say, see something, say something. And when something is amiss, network administrators and other security personnel have to use every forensic tool that's available to them to get to the bottom of the problem, and to ensure that what is actually might have infected the network is completely gone, that it's been completely scrubbed away. Now, these principles work. Taken together, their sum is mightier than the parts. Each one reinforces the other, resulting in a true culture of operational excellence. But mistakes will still happen. And when they do, it's very helpful to examine them, not only at face value, but in the context of the principles that I just described, the principles that were violated. I can almost guarantee that for any given error, you will find that more than one principle has been violated. So when a staff officer clicks on a link in an email promising discounts for online purchases, which was actually an attempt by inspectors to plant a phishing backdoor on her workstation, she was violating some combination of integrity or level of knowledge or procedural compliance or questioning attitude. And debriefing human performance errors in the context of these principles also tends to reinforce to your organization just how serious you are about using them as a guide. Now, when these principles I've articulated penetrate deeply into the fabric of your organization, they actually act like software running in the background of your people's minds as they do their daily business. And it can go a long way towards protecting you. And it really is possible to inculcate these techniques and principles into any organization, not just a cyber organization or a nuclear organization, but it is necessary to do it if the organization is to become a high reliability organization. And I have done that in other places besides nuclear propulsion plants. But how do you do it? The most important first step on this journey is leadership buy-in. After a number of very painful incidents, the U.S. Department of Defense now recognizes more fully the importance of human performance in cyberspace and has codified these techniques in a memorandum to the entire department signed by the Secretary himself. That is a powerful leadership statement from a senior leader. Even though it's probably going to take us a number of years to fully have those principles penetrate through one of the largest organizations on the planet, it's great to have the most senior person in that organization so passionate about it. I would suggest that the next most important thing you should do is establish your own set of operating principles. Whatever works for you, whatever you expect your people to be familiar with, if not know by heart. They can be specific to just your cybersecurity organization, or they can be general across your entire enterprise, as I did on USS Enterprise or elsewhere. And detailed implementation is where you're going to have to make some judgment calls, because you are going to have to decide how far down the road towards becoming a high reliability organization you want to go. Because while leader buy-in and operational excellence principles are free, training and inspections cost money. So you'll have to determine, measure the risks, see what's out there, and how much are you willing to invest versus the largely unknown cost, which for many companies is about $13 million a year of managing cybersecurity incidents. Now, there are other costs as well. Some cultures are more receptive than others to this type of enterprise activity. An organization, for example, that relies on millennials doing creative work from home on a network will require different treatment from workers who are working in a manufacturing facility like this. Now, you might say, Admiral Winnefeld, when you were working within the military, the personnel rules are different, and there's a different mindset. you can actually tell people to do things and expect them to actually get done. You might also say that these ideas were built into the nuclear propulsion program from the very beginning and were put in by a visionary rather than being brought in through some kind of wrenching change. And that some of these measures are draconian and would be tough for the average worker to absorb. Well, that's all true, which is why it's so important that different organizations will tailor their approach to their own particular needs. But you cannot become an HRO unless you do some of these things to at least some degree. But trust me, it can be done. I joke that human performance in cyber is like the weather. Everyone complains about it, but nobody does anything about it. Look at all the other difficult cultural changes, though, that organizations like yours have already been through, such as vastly improved safety standards, well-established equal opportunity programs, and everyone's efforts to prevent sexual harassment and sexual assault. In every case, it was leadership who instituted the change under a system that worked. Now, I want to tell you that I'm actually cautiously optimistic about cybersecurity. People and organizations are beginning to wake up to its importance. Some of the attacks we're hearing about in the news are actually old attacks that are only now being discovered. And on the technical side, there's a lot of good work going on to reduce our dependence on signature-based defenses. But now is not the time to let down our guard as we seek to protect our data and our networks, because the worst may be yet to come. You want to be what we call a hard target, so that your adversary moves on to be an easier victim while you constantly improve how you do business in this environment. You have to remember that zero outage in cyber is a journey, not a destination, that it's largely about preventing deviations from becoming disasters, and that to do so, we need to become, or at least approach being, a high reliability organization, and that in the process, while we build our technical capability, we cannot overlook the vitally important element of human performance. And yes, there is much the IT industry can learn from other organizations that have taken this journey. I would ask, are you ready to become a high reliability organization in cyberspace? With the increasing complexity of your networks and the increasing sophistication of cyber attacks, your business may well depend upon it. I thank you so much for your time today, and I would now be delighted to take a few comments or questions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Of course, I would have a number of questions now. Und meine Damen und Herren, Sie können auch gerne Ihre Frage auf Deutsch stellen. Sandy ist mit einem In-Ear ausgestattet. Das sehen Sie zwar nicht, aber er hört alles. Also, Ihre Fragen sind willkommen und wir brauchen einen ganz kleinen Hinweis, damit die Hostessen zu Ihnen kommen können, die rechts und links bereits mit Mikrofonen ausgestattet sind. On the way there, until somebody is actually getting there, you've sort of enumerated this sort of set of 6 requirements, like sort of starting off with leadership, training, find the right people, etc. And then you were talking about, how you deal with these people. That sounds as if there were no technical problems.
Sorry?
It sounds as if there were no problems on the technical side. I mean, the focus was more on the human failure. There must be 1 or 2 technical glitches somewhere along the way.
Of course, the magic of a nuclear propulsion plant is that it does a lot to protect itself. But along the way, things break. Redundant systems help account for that, as you pointed out in your opening remarks. But the quality is very, very high, and we count on our operators to recognize technical problems before they happen, rather than after or as they're happening. But it's so important that you not just rely on the technical. A good operator can save you from so much heartburn and so much cost when a technical problem is prevented, that it's terribly critical.
So invest in people who then sort of still dominate with all the domination of data, dominate the systems. Meine Damen und Herren, Sie müssten jetzt eigentlich an dieser Stelle Fragen haben. Ich sehe da hinten auf der rechten Seite, bitte stehen Sie kurz auf, nennen Ihren Namen und dann freuen wir uns auf Ihre Frage.
Hi, this is Stefan Kasulke. There's one question. How did you balance between respect, let's say discipline, enforcement of sticking to policies and procedures on the one hand, and on the other hand, encouraging people to be honest and to admit mistakes?
Right. That's a really good question, and it starts on day one when a propulsion plant operator enters our training system, and we tell them straight up that if you commit an honest mistake, what we might call a sin of omission, then that's okay. We understand that humans make mistakes, and we don't want you to be afraid of that. We will pull you out of the game. A supervisor may talk to you. We may do a little bit of retraining, but we need you, and we need you to be a good operator, and we're going to put you back in. You're a very expensive person to train. We can't just throw you away because you make a mistake. But if you make a dishonest mistake, if you lie to us, we cannot handle nuclear technology with people who will lie. We have to count on them telling the truth. So it's just that constant reinforcement of the importance of integrity. And I would add to that a lot of what I call positive peer pressure, that your peers understand this. And if you are tending towards dishonesty, your peers will fix that very quickly, will shut you out, that sort of thing. So it's a very, very healthy culture, the healthiest culture I think I've been around in my professional career. It's a very good question.
Thank you very much. Any more questions from the audience? The gentleman in the third row, so can the lady quickly pass over the microphone? Thank you.
Thanks. Just a quick question for you.
Your name is, sir?
Oh, sorry. I'm Nick Toos Hobson from Hitachi Data Systems, and we won the Zero Outage Award. As you gave us the award, didn't you? I was really interested in some of the things you say. Have you published anything on this stuff that could be shared, like in a book or something like that? I'd be really interested to find that out and see if we can find out more about it.
Very good. I actually co-authored an article with someone named Chris Kirchhoff and a Brit named David Upton in the Harvard Business Review last August, September timeframe. And it's the title, I think, is Cybersecurity in the Military or something like that. But it is specifically about how the nuclear propulsion program maps onto the cyber world. And it was amazing to me when I entered that program, because I entered in around 1995, and you all know where the cyber world was in 1995. It was just started to get going, right? And it was just this wonderful synergy where I said, boy, this would really work over here. And carried that through over the many, many years since then. And I really felt the need before I retired to write something about it, and it made it into Harvard Business Review.
And we can share that article with you if you want to. So just in the break, come up to us. We have time for one more very quick question. And if not, of course, I have one. There was this sort of critical incident when you decided, I take it all in my own sort of hand, and I'm going to turn around this carrier, and I'm not going to go to Cape Town after 9/11. I'm just going to go the opposite direction. Was that in line with everything that you've pointed out?
Well, it was, because there's a lot of folklore that goes along with that. It's, you can see it on Wikipedia. Right. The fact of the matter is that I was there. It was 9 o'clock in the morning in the Arabian Gulf region. Yeah. I'm sorry, it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 9 o'clock in New York.
Just as much as here.
And my safety officer said, you need to turn the TV on. And I saw a burning building. The news commentators were not sure what had happened. Was this a light airplane that had flown into the tower? Could it have been a terrorist? We just don't know. And at that moment, I saw the second airplane hit the second tower. And of course, we're not going anywhere. So we assembled our experts. There actually is an admiral who rides on the ship. We had a discussion, a conference. A number of us made recommendations. I made the recommendation, we are not going anywhere. We need to go off the coast of Pakistan as quickly as we can. And we consulted with the fleet, and of course that's what we did. So I get a lot of credit for throwing my white scarf over my shoulder and turning north, which is kind of what happened, but I really don't deserve all the credit that I get in the media over that. The actually more interesting piece of that was how we got from where we were to being off the coast of Pakistan the next morning. And it's one of those things where in crisis, people don't necessarily think straight. In order to get there and have all of our airplanes ready, we had to run aircraft elevators up and down all night. Yeah. And we don't like to run the aircraft carrier faster than 25 miles an hour to do that. But we needed to go 25 miles, or we don't like to go faster than 20 miles we needed to go 25.
Okay.
And people are saying, well, we have to get there, but we have to operate elevators. And so, very simply, you say, well, why don't we go at 30? And then we'll get everything all ready, and when it's time to run an elevator, we'll slow down to 20, and we'll run the elevators very quickly, and then we'll speed back up. I mean, the simplest thing. But we were actually off the coast the next morning and ready to go. And it was the only time in my life and my career when I was more worried about my family at home than I was about myself, because it was such confusion. We didn't know what was happening. Amazing time.
Thank you so much for sharing, and it shows that a thinking mind actually sort of finds solutions when the IT system doesn't.
Thank you, and I'm
Thank you very
delighted to
much,
have some
Sandy.
interaction in the
And I
future.
think you should pick up the idea of the gentleman, write a book.
Oh, okay. Well, I might. You never know.
Next time we see you
Okay.
as the author.
Thank you, Connie.
Thank you very
so
much. And of course, you're going to be around for a while
Yes.
at lunchtime.
Right. Okay. Thank you.